What's up, guys? Mitch, of course, it's only me. I haven't changed, same person. Commutication video log 3. Wanted to kind of touch on something that I was kind of reminded of is Olympic trials are going on, and this last week they've had a lot of the gymnastics work going on, and it's a blast for me to watch. I love watching gymnasts because nobody knows how to manipulate and have better positional integrity than a gymnast, and you'll probably hear me use them a lot as references in regards to fitness, because really it's one of the most broad range forms of athletics, where you need to be strong, you need to be conditioned, you need to be powerful, but you need to be graceful. And it's such a pleasure to watch for me, as I myself am slowly doing progressions to learn more in gymnast strength and learning to apply these with specific athletes, not all, because it's not really beneficial to all sports. But one of the great things that they do well is learning how to not move. They learn how to move well, but one of the things that really makes it even better is knowing how to not move. The anti-movement, and that's probably what I'll call this one, is the anti-movement. When I go to a gym or a big corporate box gym, whatever it may be, a lot of people are always focusing on trying to move, and we're told to move as a component of fitness. And yes, it's extremely important to be able to move, and be able to move well, and be able to move over very broad ranges of mobility, and challenge ourselves, and relax and contract muscles, and lengthen and shorten, and all these things that create muscular engagement and feedback and so forth. And that's how you can get muscle groups stronger, and build muscle to make your physique stand out a bit more. And it's funny because there's not enough people doing anti-movement. Anti-movement is really to improve positional integrity. And so this would be if you're working on like powerlifting movements, like your bench press, squat, and deadlift. This would be pause movements. So bench press, you'd pause at the chest. If you're doing it by IPF or most powerlifting federation standards, you'll pause on the chest anyway. And you'll practice to pause at the chest. But to do a hold in a halfway point, to do a pause deadlift, to do a pause squat, to expose some part of the chain of movement that either you lose or slow down, or you're less stable, or you just can't engage that muscle. Getting into that position and learning how to fire that muscle, that anti-movement, but with muscular engagement, is extremely critical to be able to develop in your athleticism, in your strength, in your integrity, in your stability, in so many different things. And so I really use this a lot with a lot of the athletes that I train, is anti-movement, anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion, anti-extension, anti-standard flexion. All of these really target the main purpose of musculature in certain aspects. And it's really cool to see the results of being able to do so. When you have someone trying to do a lateral cut playing football and change directions, you need to be able to load up the hips. You need to be able to resist the lateral flexion that the upper half of the torso really wants to do, is it carries momentum across and causes, you want to lean that way when you need to go that way. And when that happens, if you can't hold yourself, then you end up losing time in your transition, and you end up losing time on the field and risk being hit or risk being slower and leave yourself more vulnerable. And so the anti-lateral flexion, anti-rotation, those components for your core strength are tremendous. They make a huge difference. Easy examples for anti-lateral flexion would be like a overhead pal-off press, or what's another good one? Anti-lateral flexion is kind of a tough one to do. There's not a tremendous amount of exercises for it, but it can be trained. Anti-rotation, so you're talking about pal-off press, pal-off isolation, anti-rotation with I don't know the name of the exercise, but if you were to have someone, if you were to angle yourself off 45 degrees, have someone push on your hands and try to stop it before you reach straight forward, that's another fantastic anti-movement exercise or anti-rotation exercise. Supine pal-off holds. You get a lot of feedback for people that have back problems that can really do that. Do that one efficiently without any irritation to the lumbar. Anti-spinal flexion. Okay, so this is reverse plank. Oftentimes, like holding a bridge, something like that, to make sure that we can keep the posterior chain in a contracted state to where we don't round the low back. And then anti-extension in the spine, you would be looking at your standard plank, your hollow hold, stuff like that to hold position and be in good position. Maybe I'll try to get a video together in explaining some of these exercises and showing these exercises. But when you're trying to make yourself stronger, look at what it is that you can do to not move and be engaged and contract and get feedback through your system. Understand the muscles that are firing and understand the control that it is. You start to notice on a pal-off press where your shoulders start to rotate. Do you need to straighten your shoulders, or do you need to straighten your hips? Or do you need to straighten your hips through your shoulders? And getting that feedback of that control over your system is great. It's really one of the things that is underutilized in fitness and becoming strong and actually preventing injury. I had one of my young athletes, great kid. He's about 13, 14 years old, and a swimmer. Well, he was doing some dry land at the pool with one of the other coaches, and the coach had them do some running, and in which he's not a great runner. We're still working on fixing him with some of his muscular imbalances, but he stepped in a gopher hole and it caused his body to twist, and it threw his back out. Like, his back was in a lot of pain, not just muscular pain, but spinal pain. And I've only had him like a week, 2 weeks at this point, and right now his injury more than likely was caused by the fact that he couldn't resist the movement. Once he started to rotate as he went down and fell, if he could have resisted that rotation when his foot went in the hole, he probably wouldn't have gotten injured. And so the ability to protect the spine, nobody really talks about what the role of a lot of that musculature is to do, is really to keep the torso in good position, in good posture position, and not allow it to deviate from that. When you're looking at the engagement of the glutes and the abdominals and a lot of your thoracic musculature and shoulder stabilizers and stuff like that, when you're going through strength movements, really the idea is to keep the torso rigid and then have the limbs do the work. So when you go in to do a squat, when you sit into your squat, that you don't want your spine to deviate from neutral, ideally. And so all of the work and all of the movement is done in the limb, in the femur, or in the lower leg, so you have, you know, flexion extension at the knee, you have flexion extension at the ankle, but no flexion extension at the lumbar or through the spine where you'll round over. And you need the glutes to lock the hip in place. You need the abdominals to lock the hip in place. And if you're incapable of locking the hip in place, then you run the risk of having your vertebrae and your disc get beat up, and you know, really put yourself through a lot of anguish that really doesn't need to be. And so knowing how to lock and load your system to keep it in good position is integral. When you bench press, you don't want anything moving except for your arms. You want to be able to lock the shoulders in place, you know, put your shoulder blades in your back pocket when you're lying on the bench, keeping the torso rigid so that no squirming, the legs aren't moving, none of that's really moving, except when you get your leg drive, and you know, you lower your bar, so you know everything below the shoulders moves, so your humerus and your forearm and all that, you keep the wrist straight, you do the best you can to not have movement everywhere else, because if you squirm, if the torso moves, if the legs move, you know, without the proper leg drive, then that's stability that the shoulder system has to take up, and this is oftentimes another culprit of injury, pectoral injury, labrum injury, rotator cuff injury, because something became unstable and overloaded, and then it snapped, it broke, it tore, it you know, it deviated from good loaded position. And so learning how to not move, anti-movement, knowing how to engage and be rigid and have that positional integrity, all of these things are critical of an athlete. The better you cannot move, actually, you know, the better you are at anti-movement typically means the better you are at movement. Of course, making sure that your mobility is appropriate, making sure that there's no major muscular imbalances that hinder broad range of usable motion under load. And this is where we would practice, you know, movement prep and stuff like that, you know, depression, elevation of the shoulders, protraction, retraction, internal, external rotation, you know, thoracic, you know, cat-cow, and you would work on other things that allow you good long lateral motion, flexion extension. With the lumbar, you have, you know, cat-cow and other things that will allow good motion through the lumbar and stuff. And even Jefferson curls actually are a really good one, taken from gymnastics to really mobilize the thoracolumbar and lumbar regions as you go along. And so the better we can not move provides better movement in athletic endeavors. And the more broad range movement we do in our mobilizations and strengthening and learning how to strengthen load through a broad range of motions, a la, you know, gymnasts as a wonderful example, all make such a big difference. Got a little distracted there because there's a skydiving landing pad in this field that I drive by every day. It's always so cool. Like, there's a dude like 50 feet away from me that was coming down and swooping down from a jump. But I challenge you guys to learn this stuff. I challenge you guys to learn where it is that you're weak in your anti-movement and start to strengthen that. And you'll be actually tremendously surprised in how advantageous this is in your other fitness endeavors. So, you know, once again, I just want to say, you know, put the positivity out there. When you're at the gym, don't worry about being a weirdo and looking weird and not doing unconventional movements. I in fact, when I go to big gyms and populated gyms, I try to be that weirdo to challenge me to get to kind of, because I'm a very shy and introverted person. If you knew me, you would be like, yeah, that's Mitch. So I challenge you to try something that you haven't tried before. Be positive and put love out there, and be willing to help others if you can help others, but make sure that you're educated on it before you do so. All right, God bless everybody. Have a great one. Bye.